The ultimatum. The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from across the known galaxy gathered for an emergency session. Ambassador John Kane stood at the human delegation's podium, his weathered face betraying nothing of the storm brewing behind his steel-gray eyes. The weight of 17 colonies and 8 billion souls rested on his shoulders. High Counselor Vex, a towering reptilian being from the Kral Empire, activated the central hologram. Images of human settlements flickered to life, peaceful farming, communities, bustling trade stations, and research outposts scattered across the outer rim territories. What should have been a routine territorial review had become something far more sinister. The human expansion must cease, Vex declared, his voice echoing through the chamber's crystalline walls. Your species has violated the expansion accords by establishing settlements beyond the designated zones. These 17 colonies represent an illegal occupation of neutral space. Kane's jaw tightened. The colonies in question had been established with proper documentation, following every bureaucratic requirement the Council had imposed. More importantly, they were home to millions of human families who had spent generations building new lives among the stars. With respect, High Counselor, Kane replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in diplomatic service. Every settlement was approved through proper channels. We have the documentation that is now deemed insufficient, interrupted Counselor Thel from the Novan Collective. The blue-skinned humanoid's tentacles writhed with barely contained satisfaction. New evidence suggests these territories contain resources vital to galactic security. The Council has voted. Humanity has 30 standard days to evacuate all settlements. The chamber fell silent. Kane felt the blood drain from his face. 30 days to evacuate 17 colonies. It was impossible. The logistics alone would take months, even with the entire human fleet dedicated to the task. But that wasn't the worst part. And if we refuse? Kane asked, though he already knew the answer. Vex's reptilian features twisted into what might charitably be called a smile. Then the Council will authorize military intervention to secure these territories, for the greater good of galactic stability, of course. Kane looked around the chamber at the faces of beings he had worked with for years. Some avoided his gaze, others watched with cold calculation. The Altair Federation, humanity's closest allies, remained conspicuously silent. The fix was in. High Counselor, Kane said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. These colonies represent the homes of over 2 million human civilians. Families with children, elderly who have lived there for decades. You're asking us to abandon everything they've built. We are asking you to comply with Council law, Thel responded with mock sympathy. Perhaps humanity should have considered such consequences before overextending its reach. The insult hung in the air like a physical blow. Kane had seen this before, the strong taking from the weak, dressed up in legal language and justified by committee. But they had made one critical error. They had assumed humanity would simply roll over and accept it. I need to consult with my government, Kane said finally. Of course, Vex replied. But remember, Ambassador, 30 days, not 31. As the session adjourned, Kane gathered his small delegation and made his way to the secure communication chamber. The journey felt like a death march. Everything humanity had worked for in the galactic community was crumbling around them. The quantum communicator hummed to life, connecting him directly to the President's office on Earth. President Mary Foster appeared on the screen, her expression grave. She had been watching the proceedings through encrypted channels. How bad is it, John? She asked without preamble. They want us gone, Mary. 17 colonies, 2 million people. 30 days. Foster's face hardened. And if we refuse? Military intervention. They'll call it peacekeeping, but it's war. The President was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that all seemed to lead to the same dark conclusion. Finally, she spoke. John, I want you to deliver a message to the Council. Tell them that humanity formally rejects their ultimatum. Tell them that any attempt to forcibly remove our people will be considered an act of war. And tell them," she paused, her voice growing cold as winter steel. "Tell them they just made the biggest mistake in galactic history." Kane nodded grimly. "Understood, Madam President." As the connection closed, Kane stared at his reflection in the darkened screen. The Council thought they were dealing with another minor species that would bow to their will. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Humanity had been pushed too far. The line had been crossed, and there would be hell to pay. The awakening. The news hit Earth like a thunderclap. Within hours of Ambassador Kane's message, emergency sessions convened in every major capital. The Colonial Defense Force mobilized with unprecedented speed, while civilian populations across human space began preparing for the unthinkable: war with the Galactic Council. General Marcus Webb stood before a wall of holographic displays in the Strategic Command Center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Battle reports, fleet positions, and resource assessments scrolled past in an endless stream of data. At 63, Webb had spent his entire career preparing for this moment, though he had hoped it would never come. "Status report," he commanded. Colonel Lisa Park, his chief of staff, stepped forward with a tablet in hand. "Sir, we have confirmation from all 17 colonies. They're refusing evacuation orders. The colonists are organizing local militias and requesting military support." Webb nodded grimly. The colonists had guts, but guts wouldn't stop a Council battle fleet. "What about our fleet strength?" 47 ships of the line, including the dreadnoughts Vengeance and Retribution. 238 support vessels. 300,000 active personnel with another 500,000 in reserves. On paper, it looked respectable. Against the combined might of the Galactic Council, it was a joke. The Council commanded over 3,000 ships from dozens of member species, but Webb had spent decades studying their tactics, their technology, their weaknesses. He had a plan. "Sir," Park continued, "we're receiving requests for military advisors from the colonies. They want to know how to fight." "They won't have to fight alone," Webb replied. "Signal the fleet. Operation Prometheus is now active. Across human space, the greatest mobilization in the species' history began. On Luna, the massive shipyards worked around the clock, converting civilian vessels into warships. On Mars, weapons factories that had been dormant for decades roared back to life. The asteroid belt mining operations shifted from extracting rare elements to producing military hardware. But the real preparation was happening in the outer colonies themselves. The Council had made a fatal assumption that human settlements were soft targets defended by nothing more than local police forces. They were about to learn that every human colony was built with defense in mind. On New Alberta, farmer Tom Mitchell stood in his wheat field, watching as hidden panels slid open in the ground. Missile launchers rose from concealed positions, their targeting systems coming online. The agricultural equipment in his barn shed its camouflage, revealing plasma cannons and automated defense turrets. 30 years I've been waiting for this," he muttered to his neighbor Pete Johnson. 30 years of pretending to be a simple farmer while keeping these beauties in working order. Similar scenes played out across all 17 colonies. What the Council saw as helpless farming communities were actually fortress worlds, each one capable of defending itself against a substantial military force. It was humanity's greatest secret, and their ace in the hole. Back on Earth, President Foster addressed the nation from the Oval Office. Her words were carried live to every human settlement across the galaxy. "My fellow humans," she began, her voice steady and strong, "today we face a choice that will define our species for generations to come. The Galactic Council has demanded that we abandon our homes, our families, our future. They believe we will simply submit to their will as so many others have done." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "They are wrong. For too long we have played by their rules, accepted their limitations, bowed to their authority. We have been the model galactic citizens, contributing to their economy, respecting their laws, seeking peace at every turn. But peace cannot exist without justice, and there is no justice in what they demand. The president's voice grew harder. They want our colonies. They want our resources. They want to break our spirit and reduce us to a client state, dependent on their goodwill for survival. But they have forgotten something crucial about humanity. We have never been good at backing down from a fight. As of this moment, the 17 colonies are under the protection of the Human Defense Force. Any attempt to forcibly remove our people will be met with armed resistance. We do not seek war, but we will not run from it. Foster's image was broadcast across the galaxy, picked up by alien news networks and diplomatic channels. The message was clear. Humanity was drawing a line in the sand. In the council chambers, High Counselor Vex watched the broadcast with growing irritation. "Foolish primates," he hissed to his aide. "They think their primitive weapons can stand against the might of the council. Signal the fleet. It's time to teach these humans their place." But as reports began filtering in from intelligent sources, a different picture emerged. The primitive humans had been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone realized. What was supposed to be a simple police action was about to become something far more complicated. The galaxy was about to witness the birth of a new power, and it would be baptized in fire. First Blood, the Council's first expeditionary fleet, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Alberta system, with all the confidence of a bully approaching a smaller victim. Admiral Korvac of the Kral Empire commanded the impressive force, 37 warships, including 3 heavy cruisers and the massive battleship Dominator. Against a farming colony, it was overwhelming overkill. "Open a channel to the planet," Korvac ordered from his command throne. The reptilian admiral had crushed 24 rebellions in his career. This would be no different. The main screen flickered to life, showing the weathered face of Governor Mike Thompson, the colony's elected leader. Behind him, Korvac could see what appeared to be a simple government office. Wooden desk, local, artwork, family photos. The very picture of primitive colonial life. "Governor Thompson," Korvac began, his voice dripping with condescension. "I am Admiral Korvac of the Galactic Council Peacekeeping Force. You have been given lawful orders to evacuate this territory. Surrender now, and no harm will come to your people." Thompson leaned back in his chair, completely unimpressed by the display of force. "Admiral, I've got a message from the folks here on New Alberta. They said to tell you where you can stick your evacuation order." Korvac's scales bristled with anger. "You dare mock the authority of the Council? I have 37 ships. You have... what? Farm equipment?" "Something like that," Thompson replied with a slight smile. "But Admiral, I've got a question for you. In all your years of crushing colonies, have you ever fought humans before?" The question caught Korvac off guard. "What does that matter?" "Well, you see, we humans have this saying, mess with the bull, you get the horns. You might want to remember that in the next few minutes." Before Korvac could respond, his tactical officer's voice cut through the bridge. "Admiral, multiple contacts rising from the planet's surface. They're moving fast, sir." The tactical display lit up like a Christmas tree. Hundreds of small craft were launching from concealed positions across New Alberta's surface. But these weren't civilian shuttles. They were military strike fighters, sleek and deadly, accelerating at rates that made the Council pilots nervous. "Impossible," Korvac breathed. "Intelligence reported no military installations." "Intelligence was wrong," Thompson said calmly from the screen. "Admiral, meet the 47th Colonial Defense Squadron. They've been waiting 30 years for this party." The human fighters closed the distance with shocking speed. Council point defense systems opened fire, but the human pilots flew like demons, weaving through the defensive fire with precision that spoke of decades of training. The first wave struck the Council fleet's lighter ships, and the results were devastating. The destroyer Blade of Truth simply vanished in a ball of superheated plasma. The cruiser Eternal Vigilance listed heavily to starboard, its main engines dead. Across the fleet, damage reports poured in. "How are they doing this?" Korvac's tactical officer reported. "Their weapons are cutting through our shields like they're not even there." What the Council didn't know was that humanity had spent decades studying their technology, learning their weaknesses, developing countermeasures. Every human weapon had been specifically designed to exploit gaps in Council defenses. The result was a massacre. But the real surprise came when the planet's surface opened up like a flower of death. Massive particle beam cannons, hidden beneath what appeared to be grain silos, lanced out across space. The battleship Dominator shuddered under the impact of weapons that shouldn't have existed on a farming world. "Sir," the communications officer's voice was panicked. "We are receiving transmissions from the other colonies. They're all doing the same thing. Every single one is fighting back." Korvac stared at the tactical display in growing horror. 17 colonies, each one revealing hidden military installations, each one fighting with a ferocity that defied explanation. This wasn't supposed to happen. Client species didn't fight back. They submitted. They obeyed. "Admiral," Governor Thompson's voice cut through the chaos. "I've got another message for you. This one's from our president. She says to tell you that you just stepped on a hornet's nest. And Admiral?" Thompson's friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by something cold and dangerous. "We're just getting started." The transmission cut out, leaving Korvac staring at a dead screen while his fleet burned around him. The Dominator's shields failed under continued bombardment, and he felt the deck shudder beneath his feet. "Signal the fleet," he ordered, his voice barely a whisper. "Emergency jump, all ships emergency jump." As the remnants of the first expeditionary fleet fled into hyperspace, they left behind a message that would echo across the galaxy. Humanity would not go quietly into the night. The prey had become the predator, and the galaxy would never be the same. On New Alberta, Governor Thompson watched the Council ships disappear into hyperspace and reached for his communicator. "This is New Alberta to Defense Command. Package delivered. The Hornets are definitely mad now. The war had begun, and humanity had drawn first blood. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species filled the Great Hall, their voices creating a cacophony of fear, anger, and disbelief. The impossible had happened. A client species had not only refused to submit, but had actually inflicted casualties on a Council fleet. High Counselor Vex stood at the central podium, his reptilian features twisted with rage. 17 fleets, he announced, his voice cutting through the noise. 17 separate expeditionary forces, representing the military might of a dozen species. All of them bloodied by these primates. The word hung in the air like a curse. Across the chamber, representatives shifted uncomfortably. The attack on the human colonies was supposed to have been a simple police action. Instead, it had become a nightmare. "How is this possible?" demanded Counselor Thel from the Noven Collective. "Our intelligence indicated they were simple farming colonies." "Our intelligence was wrong," Vex replied coldly. "Every single colony was a military installation disguised as a civilian settlement. The humans have been preparing for this war for decades." On the far side of the galaxy, Admiral Webb received the battle reports with grim satisfaction. The first phase of Operation Prometheus had exceeded all expectations. Not only had humanity successfully defended all 17 colonies, but they had also captured several Council ships intact. The intelligence gathered from those vessels would prove invaluable. "Ma'am," Colonel Park reported to President Foster during their daily briefing, "we've confirmed the Council is mobilizing their full military might. Intelligence suggests they're preparing to send over 200 ships in the next wave." Foster nodded grimly. "And our response? Phase 2 is ready to commence. The Prometheus directive has been distributed to all deep space assets. We're about to show them what happens when you corner a human." What the Council didn't understand was that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their military might. It was their ability to adapt, to improvise, to survive against impossible odds. And they were about to demonstrate that on a galactic scale. Captain Sarah Blake commanded the cargo freighter Midnight Runner, one of hundreds of human civilian vessels scattered across the galaxy. To any casual observer, She was just another merchant captain hauling supplies between systems. But the cargo holds of her ship contained something far more dangerous than trade goods. "Captain," her first officer reported, "we're approaching the HFY system. Council patrol ships are requesting inspection." Blake smiled coldly. "Permission granted. Tell them we're carrying agricultural supplies to the inner worlds." The Council inspection team boarded the Midnight Runner with the casual arrogance of a species that had never been challenged. They found exactly what they expected: shipping containers full of grain, water purification systems, and farming equipment. What they didn't find were the hidden compartments containing military-grade weapons and a squad of human special forces operators. 3 hours after the inspection was complete, the Council naval base at HFY Prime exploded in a series of devastating blasts. The Midnight Runner was long gone by then, jumping to hyperspace with the precision of a military operation. Similar attacks erupted across the galaxy. Human merchants struck at Council supply lines, communication relays, and military installations. What appeared to be a scattered collection of civilian ships revealed itself to be a coordinated military network that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. "They're everywhere," Admiral Korvac reported to the Council, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "Our entire logistics network is under attack. They've been using their merchant fleet as a cover for military operations." The scope of the deception was staggering. Every human cargo ship, every passenger liner, every civilian vessel in space was potentially a military asset. The Council had been worried about 17 colonies, while humanity had been turning their entire civilian infrastructure into a weapon. But the real shock came when Earth's deep space monitoring stations detected massive fleet movements in the outer rim. The Human Defense Force wasn't just defending. They were mobilizing for something far more ambitious. "They're not just fighting a defensive war," Counselor Vex realized with growing horror. "They're preparing for an offensive. But against what target?" The answer came 12 hours later, when the Council's regional command center at Proxima Station went dark. The last transmission showed impossible numbers of human ships dropping out of hyperspace. Not just military vessels, but converted civilian ships, armed mining platforms, and even modified luxury liners bristling with weapons. "This is Admiral Susan Cross of the Human Defense Force," came the transmission that followed. "To all Council forces in this sector, you have 30 minutes to surrender or evacuate. After that, anyone remaining will be considered a hostile combatant." The message was broadcast across the galaxy, and its implications were clear. Humanity wasn't just defending their colonies, they were going on the offensive. The prey had become the hunter, and the galaxy's greatest predators were about to become the hunted. In the Council chambers, the representatives sat in stunned silence as the reports poured in. They had created a monster, and now it was coming. For them, the swarm was loose and there was nowhere to hide. The reckoning, the siege of the Galactic Council homeworld, began at dawn, local time. 300 human ships materialized at the edge of the system, their arrival so sudden and overwhelming that the planetary defense grid barely had time to register the threat before the first salvos began. Admiral Webb commanded the fleet from the bridge of the dreadnought Retribution, watching as his carefully planned assault unfolded with mechanical precision. 6 months of warfare had transformed the Human Defense Force from a small, defensive organization into a galaxy-spanning military juggernaut. The Council was about to reap what they had sown. "Status report," Webb ordered. "Outer defense platforms are down," reported his tactical officer. "The orbital shipyards are surrendering. Council home fleet is requesting terms." Terms. The word would have been laughable 6 months ago. Now, it was the Galactic Council begging for mercy from the species they had tried to crush. In the Council chambers below, chaos reigned. High Counselor Vex stood before a room of representatives whose species had watched their military forces systematically dismantled by human ingenuity and determination. Dozens of worlds had fallen, their defenses crumbling before the onslaught of converted civilian ships and improvised weapons. "They've taken everything," Counselor Thel reported, her voice hollow with defeat. Our mining operations, our supply lines, our forward bases. Half our member species are requesting separate peace negotiations. The scope of the disaster was unprecedented. In 6 months, humanity had gone from a minor client species to the dominant military power in the galaxy. Their tactics were unlike anything the Council had faced. Asymmetric warfare on an unimaginable scale, using their vast civilian infrastructure as a weapon of war. How many ships do they have? Vex demanded. Intelligence estimates over 2,000. Vessels now under military command, came the reply. But sir, that's not the worst part. They're not just conquering, they're liberating. Every world they take, they're freeing the local populations from Council authority. That was the cruelest irony. The species that the Council had oppressed for millennia were welcoming the humans as liberators. World after world had risen in rebellion, their populations joining the human cause with an enthusiasm that spoke to decades of suppressed resentment. The Bridge of the Retribution. Webb received a priority transmission from Earth. President Foster's face appeared on the screen, her expression serious but determined. Admiral, the Council is requesting peace negotiations. They want to discuss terms. Webb's weathered face showed no emotion. What are your orders, Madam President? Accept their request, but make it clear that this ends on our terms, not theirs. The negotiations took place aboard a neutral vessel, a massive space station that had been hastily converted into a diplomatic facility. The human delegation was small but impressive. President Foster herself, flanked by Admiral Webb and a handful of senior advisors. The Council delegation filled half the conference room, representatives from dozens of species who had once considered humanity beneath their notice. The Galactic Council is prepared to offer a ceasefire. High Counselor Vex began, his voice carefully controlled, in exchange for a return to the previous territorial arrangements. No, Foster interrupted, her voice cutting across the room like a blade. You seem to be under the impression that you're in a position to negotiate. You're not. The silence that followed was deafening. Vex's scales bristled with suppressed anger, but he remained seated. He had no choice. Here are our terms, Foster continued. First, immediate recognition of human sovereignty over all 17 disputed colonies, plus any additional territories we have liberated during this conflict. Second, reparations for the damage caused by your unprovoked attack on our civilians. Third, the dissolution of the current council structure and its replacement with a truly representative galactic government. Impossible, Vex sputtered. The council has maintained order for over 1,000 years. The council has maintained oppression for over 1,000 years, Foster shot back. That ends now. You can accept these terms, or we can continue this war until every council stronghold in the galaxy is reduced to rubble. Your choice. The negotiations lasted 3 days. In the end, the council had no choice but to accept every human demand. The age of council dominance was over, replaced by a new galactic order that emphasized freedom, representation, and the rights of all sentient species. As the human fleet withdrew from the council homeworld, Admiral Webb stood on the bridge of the Retribution and reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, they had been a minor species facing extinction. Now they were the architects of a new galactic civilization. The Council had crossed the line, thinking they could break humanity's spirit. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous: the human capacity for righteous anger and the determination to fight for what was right. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what humanity intended. The war was over. The future had begun.